All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and good to see all you guys again after a pretty crazy week. And so one of the things that got my attention this week, and I've been hearing other people talk about it. Enterprises are obviously spending a lot. They're betting big on AI. And by the way, was it Altman that said, "Oh, we might be in a bubble here, but my company's worth $500 billion. Don't worry about it." But one of the big things that got my attention was, MIT put out this study that basically the headline was, 95% of pilots are failing, and only 5% of companies are seeing real revenue acceleration, which I think that's an interesting phrase that they put out there, and the rest are not. And so the question starts to beg, like, so is it the models? Is it like, are they just not good enough, or is it more that, maybe people aren't using them right, or maybe there's some just misperceptions about how easy it is and so on. So anyway, so that's going to be a big part of the topic today, and we'll dig into that. I got a couple of bonus topics if we have a little bit of time. So we're going to try to pull back the curtain a little bit on that. I'm sure a lot of the folks watching may not have gotten this article. And if you try to find it, by the way, it's like behind paywalls all over the place. It's really hard to sort of find one that you can actually show, but I found one.
So you're going to break people's business model right here. Break the paywall business model and share it. Okay, excellent.
Yep. Just go here. Yeah, exactly. Yahoo Finance, people. This is where you got to go. And so here we are getting into this report, and here's where they're saying 5% of programs fail to achieve rapid revenue acceleration. So I thought it was interesting. Okay, well, there are other ways to get benefits, right? So they're just saying, like, there's a lot of stalled things going on. 150 interviews, right, and surveys and so on. And by the way, if you try to actually get to the study, you have to fill out this questionnaire about like who you are and maybe get your hands on it. But they're talking about what's the core issue. It wasn't so much the quality of the models, but very much a learning gap was a big point. And yeah, you're seeing some value from sort of GPT, but in terms of a larger enterprise setting, folks are struggling.
Hey, Pete, one of the things that stood out to me late in the article is where they talk about the 5% that is successful. Ironically, it'll probably align with some of the points we're going to make, but it's largely where they focused more on the efficiency side or the cost reduction side as a place to start, rather than the revenue lift. I mean, it's potential for all of the above, but they did sort of narrow it back to that as the successful start.
Yeah, that's why I thought the study that they're not getting revenue lift, and so really the question is, so look, all right, so now how did we get here? Why is this happening? Where are people getting stuck?
It's interesting. I had a fascinating conversation this week with a candidate that was interviewing with us, wanting to kind of get into the fast pace that we're in, coming out of some of those environments where all those failures are happening, right? So what he explained was really interesting. He said in early 2023, he and a team of 2 others, so 3 people, in about 90 days, put together a working pilot. It was integrated with Slack, and it reduced the overall volume from 10,000 users through this Slack channel. It reduced the number of tickets they were creating in some sort of a system by 35%, right? Massive impact, just the kind of impact that you'd expect from this level of productivity. And then came along the Department of Central AI Services that was helpfully created by his enterprise to facilitate the further development of the properly and I kid you not, 30
did they look
people.
Like Agent
they
Smith
did. They did. They must have, because
that's what I would have guessed. Yeah.
A year later, and 30 people on the team, and the project was shut down. From a work, right?
That's
and so
crazy.
it's emblematic. It's emblematic of what's going on, because the technology is super powerful, but you do have to know how to use it, and you have to understand it in layers, and it's it's nuanced and it's subtle, and it's more so than I don't know, routers and databases, right? At the same time, it's not impossible, and it helps you do it, right? So you just have to switch onto this track that's kind of the go forward groove. One
of my observations is, when ChatGPT hit, I think it was like, I don't know, it took maybe a weekend for us to go, oh, we need to reinvent everything we're doing sort of around this. And my recollection, Mike, is that we said, oh, we'll have something up and running in 30 days, and this was around, solving these real, serious analytic problems, like why is my market share down, sort of thing, right? And I remember you in this mad scientist in the lab, and you'd come out every 60 days with some new approach. And I remember, the first one was okay, second one was okay, third one was okay. I think one we had a hackathon where we had everybody sort of testing it, and it was okay. And then you had sort of this aha moment. And maybe you could talk a little bit about the aha moment.
Oh, that moment. Yeah. Well, yeah. So no, you're absolutely right. Starting in November of 22, we at the beginning, it was every few days we were iterating. Oh, this is the right way the block diagram works. This is, and then it was every couple of weeks, and then a new model would come out, and that would reset us. And so, yeah, there were three major generations back then, but there were 30 evolutions of the pattern.
Sort of in between,
And the problem is that the block diagram doesn't get laid out the way they teach you in school. It doesn't get laid out like a system. It's more like, working with these models is more like working with a Jello that you have to shape and form. So the key that you're talking about was a big transformation for us, a big wake up moment when we said, what the model's really good at is talking to people. So get out of the way, right? Let the model talk to people. That conversation is human to human. Let those two interact, and then get on the other side of the model and make sure that everything it's saying is true. Make sure that when it notes a brand name, that brand name matches something in the database. Make sure that when it makes an insight, that insight is interesting and useful to the end user, right? So it was getting out of the way and getting into a mode of helping the model. And really, it's all about saying govern everything that goes into the model based on facts from the real world. Check everything that comes out of the model based on facts from the real world. But get out of the way of the conversation. Let that conversation flow naturally. And that was overnight. We went from providing a lot of valuable facts to providing insights to our customers.
Yeah. And so my I guess my take on all that was it took a lot of iterations to just sort of figure out, like, where does this thing fit, and what is it good at, and what is it not good at. And it just took a lot of iterations. I guess I would say, I suspect that a lot of large enterprises they just don't have the time or the resources or the energy to go through a lot of those iterations. And there's still not an exact playbook out there on how to leverage this stuff. Stu, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a range of success. I think the AI and the enterprises are clear win, I think, for most places on personal productivity, because that's easy,
for sure.
right?
For
So
sure.
in other words, like if you just give someone ChatGPT and they can write their emails a little faster, or they can summarize something, or they can take the transcript from something like this and turn it into a blog post, or there's a bunch of personal productivity tests that are kind of distinguished by short run, you know what I mean? Like you're interacting directly with the user. The user can provide the basic context that it does, and it gives a quick answer. I would also say that in most places that have tried seriously, not everyone has tried seriously, but in most places where everyone has tried seriously, coding, software development use cases have tended to see some pretty serious improvements.
That feels like the one has really got some
and
fit right now.
I think one reason for that is software is kind of self-documenting. You know what I mean? Like if in the sense that it's self-defining, maybe more so than documenting, right? Even if it's poorly documented, it's in a logical structure where someone, if they have enough time and energy, can go through the code and understand exactly what it does, right? And of course, the AI doesn't require much time to do that compared to what it takes for us humans.
Right.
I think where things get tough is when you're wanting to do harder, longer run tasks more autonomously with the AI. that require a lot of knowledge that's not necessarily inherent. You know what I mean? So, and this isn't that different than, to me, it's the difference between being smart and skilled. You know what I mean? So, in other words, like, so take take an example. Take a smart kid off the street and put them into a company they've never been at, in a role that they've never been at, and tell them to get productive. You know what I mean? Well, man, I got to get an email account. I got to get a Slack account. I got to figure out the hidden network that every company has of the way things actually get done, which is probably slightly different than the way things are documented or what the org chart says. I've got to, there's all this nuance that's got to be picked up, and that usually takes time, even for a super smart person coming into a new company. The same thing's kind of true of AI. There's a lot of context it needs in order to do these long run things right. And right now, humans are actually interesting that they can pick up a lot of that context extremely quickly and easily. The AIs need a little more, specific help, I think, to get that context and to be really effective. So, the places that are focusing on how do I bring the AI, how do I provide that right context to the AI so that it can, so that it's the work that it's doing, like Mike said, right, is grounded in truth, right? We're sending it the right information. We're giving it everything it needs to be able to use the intelligence that it has. The companies that do that seem to be successful, but that's hard. That takes real work, and so I think that's where the rubber meets the road.
It's funny you say it takes hard work. I think there's a couple of interesting things happening that I see. One is a lot of folks are just looking for the easy button. I just want the AI easy button. I want to apply this one thing. I want it to hit all my data. I want it to sort of magically allow, people to use AI to sort of analyze their business, and I could just sort of check that off my list and be done. And well, good luck with that. I don't. Yes, like you said, great. You get some personal productivity from a ChatGPT, or some tool. You'll stand up your internal website that answers questions about your time off policies and so on. But you're not going to get these deep agentic workflows stood up without all the things that you talked about, Stu. So I think we see this sort of underestimating the level of focus and effort and context that needs to be required to really deliver a bunch of value.
There's probably two reasons for that too. One is the personal productivity gain was so easy.
So easy.
You're right. Like this, like when we all had that moment with the early days of GPT-4 or whatever.
Every day,
where,
even now, it happens over and over.
First game.
Yeah. Totally agree.
Yeah. So I think that just kind of everyone's translated that to a lot of other tasks. And then too, I think there's a lot of, it's weird in some ways. There's a lot of things that are overrated in the world of AI and, overhyped in the world of AI. And there's a lot of things that are underhyped in the world of AI, which is kind of normal in the early part of technology adoption cycles. But I think it's, there's a lot of hype out there that says this thing is magical and PhD level smart and all this other stuff. And there's enough truth behind that, but it's a layered nuance behind that. It doesn't really, just like if you brought in a super smart employee to your company, if you don't invest in getting them integrated into the company, understanding everything about your company and the way that it works, they're not going to be that useful. And the same thing is true with the AI.
And that takes real work to make happen. Jim?
I completely agree with that analogy. And I've probably had 3 client discussions this week where they were new, very, very immature in the AI space, sort of trying to figure it out. And, what's an LLM and what's an agent? And my strong recommendation was set that aside. Don't think about that for a minute. Just ask yourself, You just hired a really smart employee. How would you make them successful? That's the same way you need to think about when we're talking about sort of enterprise workflows, enterprise outcomes. What do you want them to do? Well, you might show them some examples of it. You would talk to them about what your business is about. You would give them access to the data they need to do the job, but not all the data in the company, because that would be distracting to them. You would give them the tools they need to do their job. In the old days, we might be thinking about Microsoft Office or email, but not every tool. They don't need everything. And then you would check in on them and see how it's going. And you would probably need to maybe alter all the instructions you gave them as you realize that they're deviating a little bit. All of that takes some time, but it's a great place to start. Think about it that way. Don't necessarily think about it as a technology that's magical. But when you get it right, their ability to scale is sort of infinite. So whether they're doing invoice processing for you, or they're doing high order analysis about your products out in the marketplace, or any number of other things, or looking at optimizing your supply chain, they can, once you get it right, they can scale infinitely. That's the beauty of it.
But I do think it's a good sort of a good thing to keep in mind. It's around, think about the effort it would take to train a new employee to do a job. It's much more like that than it is sort of hitting the easy button of just getting everybody ChatGPT, which is certainly pretty magical. I feel like one of the biggest things that gets companies off course. One, there is this perception that it's super easy, so they're all trying to sort of do it themselves. Everybody we talk to is trying to build all these things themselves in-house, and maybe they're leveraging Microsoft or Google or something like that. But they're all sort of trying to build things, and I think the ease of ChatGPT and some of those things is definitely a contributor to that. But then B, they don't have this time that, always to put in to figure out where the limits are and where you need to put in the sort of the more intern work. But to me, the thing that people really seem to just not get is the stochastic nature of the LLMs. The video that Andre Karpathy did. But one of the things he does in there is he goes to a model that's straight out of pre-training. And if you don't know what it is, go watch the video. But so it's sort of a raw model, and he types in 2 + 2, and it just sort of tells this story about 2 + 2, and 2 + 2 is a great number, and then he does it again and again and again, and it just gives you a different answer every time. And it is sort of to you that, wow, okay, at the core, these things are just sort of this really amazing autocomplete, and they just want to sort of continue the sentence and start to build, sort of this internet document. I think that's sort of the big miss for a lot of companies. I'm curious, what you guys think about that.
So interestingly, while it is true that the models are stochastic, that can make people feel like it's a complete unknown. And the reality is it's not. It is a machine running calculations, and they are deterministic calculations. It's just that it starts from a different random place at different times, right? And so it's not that we don't know what's ever going to come out. It's that it would be really expensive to make it always come out the same, right? It would be prohibitively expensive to have your own stateful copy of this giant machine out there. So that's kind of one part. So we accept as a real constraint the fact that it's going to be stochastic. It's going to say things that are a little bit less controlled. Than really what that implies is that we have to change our mindset about what computers do. And what do I mean by that? Well, we're sort of used to saying when a computer makes a decision, it's equals, or it's greater than, or it's less than, or it's not equals, right? We're used to those kinds of. In a Gen AI world, you have to be ready to accept the word like. You have to be able to say the thing that it did is like the thing that it, yesterday is like what it did today. Those things are similar enough to where I can accept them, right? Now, when it's a fact, it better be, the same fact today and the same fact tomorrow, right? I can verify those facts. But when it's when it's subjective, when it's qualitative, we have to be ready to accept that semantic similarity in order to make it useful, right? To put it to work.
Yep. That ties exactly back to the conversation we were having earlier. If you sort of think about it more as a person, that would be true. If you asked a person the same question tomorrow, you might get a slightly different answer, phrased a slightly different way. And it would depend somewhat maybe on the way you asked it. And that's sort of the nature of what you're getting here. So, I mean, I think that analogy keeps going with the way you just described it. If you just keep thinking about it that way.
And to me, that's part of the magic of like where to use the LLM. Where is the sort of the non-deterministic nature of an LLM really useful? It's really useful if you're trying to write something, or if you're trying to create a narrative or a summary or something like that. It could be really dangerous though in a bunch of situations. And one of the ones I'll bring up, we see it all the time, is people are saying, hey, let's have the LLM generate SQL to answer sort of these sophisticated business questions. Jim, we see that we're sort of up against that constantly. That people believe, that's the easy button. I'll have this text to SQL thing connected to my whole. We literally had somebody say, "Oh, what would it take to connect this text to SQL to 1,400 tables across the enterprise?" And we're like, "Well, you might want to be careful about what you're saying here."
Yeah, I mean, you can do it. Yeah, I mean, you can definitely do it. And you will ask the question of it. It'll generate SQL, and you will get an answer back. And a lot of times, it might generate the right SQL, and it might give you what you expected. But there are really sort of two things going on here. A, it might not generate the correct SQL. So there's some risk there. And B, it really gets back to the business side of the equation. Who's asking the question? What are they asking the question for? What are they trying to do? What's the risk if they do get a wrong answer? Sort of like what negative results could, if they take that data and run with it? And are they in a position, do they know enough about the data that they would even know that they've gotten the wrong answer? Or if they come back tomorrow and ask and think they're asking the same question, hey LLM, or hey agent for me, go give me this answer. If they change the question a little bit, the human may think they're asking the same question. The LLM may go generate the SQL and get you the answer correctly, but it's not exactly the same. So there's a lot of risk in sort of turning over that to a language model. That it gives you just incorrect SQL, but things are getting better there. It's going to take time. But B, you got to be able to know that whether or not it gave you the right answer. And then what is the intent? Yeah. What are you trying to do with it? What's the risk of a wrong answer? It's not that there's not a place for this. There is. But this gets to the business problem, the business question. What are you trying to do with it? And make sure you apply the AI correctly. And where you need to make sure you have exactly the same answer every time, there's sort of different techniques, different guardrails to be used.
I hate to keep beating this analogy to death, but I think it's actually, it is a lot more like a human. In other words, I'm pretty good at writing SQL, or at least I used to be when, before LLMs did it a lot for me, ironically, based on what I'm going to say. But but if you gave me, right, if you just dropped me into a company and you said, here's my 1,400 tables, go write this report for me, right? The odds are very, very high that my first attempt to get that for you is going to be wrong in some sort of way, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's so much more behind what a given table means than just, the columns and rows, right? And you really wind up and you get this. I'm working with someone right now, and you're going into all of the nuance of the industry you're working in, the way that they like to look at things, the having to wrap your head around, what does this row actually represent? Okay, this row represents, this type of order and this type of environment from this type of user, and what's in the user, how is this getting generated, so I can assess the quality of it. How do people like to to do this measure because there's two choices, right? Like if say I'm working on churn, right? I might have multiple ways I could calculate a churn statistic, right? But if I don't align it with the way that the organization's used to or that makes sense in this domain for that data, it's going to be wrong, at least in the sense of not matching what the user who asked me for the report is expecting.
Right.
And that's true. I mean, like I say, just
Right.
drop any good data analyst into a raw situation and they're going to struggle for that until they get the right context and understanding of everything. And I think that's so I think, you know, in those situations where all this right additional information has been given to the LLM about what it's trying to do and the data set behind it, it actually can do a pretty good job very often of writing the SQL. But if you just say like, here's 1,400 tables, go nuts, you know, and pray that it gets it right.
It will.
You know, it will.
It will go nuts.
You know, so it takes, you know, so and it all just goes back to that, having the right, deeper context around what you're working with. Correct.
But there, I'm gonna a little bit of a call out here. There are prominent vendors providing solutions that are putting their clients, their customers at risk and not fully explaining this problem. They're saying, hey, and I don't want to name names here, but think of some of the biggest sort of database vendors out there now who have SQL generation capabilities, and they are encouraging their clients to use these in broad-based ways, and not just sort of the smart data analyst who understands the data and will understand if the answer that came back isn't exactly right, but way out there on the edge with business users who, you know, for them AI's magic, and they don't know enough about the underlying data to potentially know that what they got back isn't right. And I mean, I think it's very inappropriate in terms of some of the messaging that's going on in the marketplace. But, you know, we're all sort of in the hype cycle, and it is what it is.
We see a lot of that where, and again, it's sort of led by teams that are sort of maybe analyst centric, right? So their job every day, they get questions from users, they're writing SQL queries every day, and sort of the dream is, oh, I could, you know, have this tool and just hand that to the business user and they can self-serve. I totally get that, and that's where I think this sort of they're maybe not quite understanding like really where to draw the line depending on who the user is, what problem they're trying to solve, and what their capabilities are. What we're telling people is, look, these are great tools. We have the same, we've implemented the same kinds of things. And what we'll tell people though is, look, really great for an analyst who can understand the SQL, check it, make sure it's right, and then maybe package that up for a business user. But if you have a business user that doesn't have these skills and they're in a high stakes situation, they're trying to make these, you know, business decisions pretty quickly, it's important to then take those things that would be call it non-deterministic in the output of an LLM and make it deterministic, so that you can say, yes, this has been vetted by an expert,
right?
And when we look at market share this way, it's going to do it the right way. It's going to hit the right tables. It's going to say the right things, and so you can count on it to make a business decision. It's important to make sure that those are sort of in a safe box and made deterministic for those users in those use cases. Mike, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. There's a case that comes to mind for me is very, very personal. I lived in Prague. I was learning Czech, and I said to someone on the street, you know, what I meant to say was, I don't speak Czech, right? And you know, and in Czech, every word gets conjugated with, you know, the masculine, feminine, past, future, whatever. And she turned around and walked away from me very angry, right? And so I went to the office and said to somebody that was a native speaker, I said, what do you think I said? This is how I said it. What did I say? And she said, you told her, you meant to say, I don't speak Czech. And what you said is, you should not speak, Czech woman. right? So what's the
Beautiful.
difference, right?
That went over
Love
well.
that speed
No,
check woman.
right. So what happened there? Well, I was incapable of understanding the results that I was presenting. Right. That is what happened.
Right. Oh,
And
interesting. Yeah.
so what happens if a business user asks a question, gets back some SQL, runs it, and says, "Look, things are great," right? They're interpreting something that they do not understand by doing that, right? So we have to overlay the model as a something that tests itself before that content is presented back to the user. And the way that this is done is it's so interesting. There's so many layers of the AI work where AI helps you solve AI problems. So a really good example, and I hear this all the time, LLMs hallucinate, hair on fire, can't use that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
only good for
Right.
pirate jokes, right? Here's the way to the first easy tip, pro tip, how to stop hallucinations. But the first thing you ask an LLM is, hey, here's a bunch of stuff. Can you answer this question? Yes or no? Don't tell me anything else. Just tell me yes or no, you can't answer the question. If it says no, don't ask it to answer the question. If it
Right.
says yes, it probably won't hallucinate, right? But
Right.
if you just
Right.
ask it the question cold and expect
Yeah.
it to
Interesting.
answer, I don't know, you're never going to see that happen. Why? Well, because it was
Yeah.
trained on fairy tales and novels and TV shows and K1 reports, or
Yeah.
all these.
Yeah.
It's trained on everything to finish the story. So if you never
Yep.
set it up to fail, like Stu was saying, it's a junior analyst. If you never set it up to fail, it won't.
Yeah.
If you check its results, they'll be more accurate, right?
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to find those cases where you need a ton of work done at that entry level that you can define well enough with instructions that you don't set it up to
Yeah.
ever do the wrong thing, and make it always so that the user can interpret the way that it was done and decide if
Yeah.
it's right or not. You're golden, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yep.
Awesome. So let's do this. I'll try to maybe put a little bit of a bow on this section, and if you guys are game, we'll sort of move into the what's now starting to sound like a tired buzzword, agents, but we're just sort of getting started.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I think that the subjects are sort of related, right? In the sense that
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the first topic that we were covering is really solved by this one, right? So an agent now, Anthropic famously defined it as LLMs in a loop, right?
Right.
So an agent is, first of all, a process that does a useful piece of work, right? So
Mm.
it's not answering finishing an email or something like that. It does a useful piece of work that you would say is quantifiable. The second thing, it demonstrates that it did it right, right? So there's a way to prove that the thing that it did is correct. And the third thing is it leaves you behind something so that same thing is repeatable, right?
Mm.
So three easy aspects to what an
Okay.
agent does, right? So it's not finish my email sentence for me, because there's seven
Yeah.
different ways of doing that. Who can
It's
prove it
just an
right?
LLM call or
Right,
whatever. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it is, but if it kind of meets those three, okay, it's doing a useful piece of work. It has proof that it did the thing
Yeah.
right, and next time it'll
Interesting.
do it the same, right? Then and obviously behind the scenes there's LLMs in a loop and all that good stuff. But those are
Right.
those are the
Right.
3 points that at least
Okay.
that we define the purpose of an
Yeah.
agent. That suddenly introduces the need for if these things are doing useful work, well, now they're going to be proprietary and special to my enterprise, which means they're behind authentication. And to
Yeah.
do useful work, they're going to have to reach and
Yeah.
grab resources that are
Yeah. Yeah.
probably secret. So again,
Right.
they're going to have to be isolated, right? So
Yeah.
whereas I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
open up a GPT prompt and anything that's ever been trained on, my users can
Right.
finish their email with that. I don't
Right.
want that to
Right.
be the case for
Yeah.
solving my core business problems.
Exactly. Exactly. Stu, do you have a handy definition you like for
Yeah,
agents?
I mean, I like Mike's definition. I think, the interesting thing that's inferred from that definition is that there's a wide range of agents, right? And
Yeah.
so, and this is one
Mm-hmm.
of the key parts of agent design, is picking out what level of agent you need. So, and so sort of at one end of the spectrum of this, there's what I would call more uh, uh, workflows, right? So you're using an LLM inside of a defined structured workflow. think of it as I'm using a human on the assembly line to do this piece, right?
Yeah.
And it's pretty well structured what piece is coming before me and what piece is coming after me. And it's pretty well structured what my input and output needs to be in order to do this task right. That's kind of on the most simplistic side of what I think you could still call an agent and fit Mike's definition. On the other side, you have much more complex work that requires, planning, first of all, planning how I want to do, because I need to do this a different way each time, depending on exactly, what is being asked for and what the output needs to be. Then I've got to execute on it. Then I've got to review and verify those results. And then I've probably got to iterate because it probably wasn't quite right. Do that in a loop until it meets whatever criteria I was hoping for, right? And then I've got to present and narrate the results in a well-structured way, right? So that's, and when you get into this agent design, you even then get into like, well, I'm not just going to have one agent doing that. I'm going to break this task into a bunch of things and have these sub-agents. And so you get, agents working with agents, and it gets much more sophisticated. And so I think one reason why people get so confused about the definition of an agent or things like that is there is this wide spectrum that I think all meets the definition of taking on useful work and being able to solve it, but in a repeatable way. But that's really where the rubber meets the road. And I think the idea is you should always choose the simplest one that gets the job done. You know what I mean? In other words, like if a workflow, if a workflow process will work for you, you should use a workflow process, most likely. And if, only break it in, add these other layers of complexity only when it's, kind of demonstrated is really needed for the task.
Yeah. I've had a definition in my head, which was just around some combination of LLMs, tools, and context. Meaning, in the LLMs can put a plan together and they can iterate until they're done, and so on. That was sort of my working definition. I think, at least for me, when I would use like a GPT-5 and it's showing, like, oh, I'm going to go, do this web search, and I'm going to go, going to sort of exercise. Run a bunch of tools, especially if you use agents, right? That they call agent, which is almost like a web browser tool. I don't know. I feel like I get a good feeling for, okay, that's a kind of agent, and illustrates the kinds of things that they can do.
So let me lean into that for a second, because I think you're exactly right. Context and tools, check. But what you just pointed out is also interesting. There is a flow. If you look at all of the different agent frameworks that are out there from each of the major manufacturers, and now also from a few third parties, there's always the notion of ultimately a flow that it's going to go through. And what I mean by that flow is, if you're let's say you're just answering a user's question, the flow is very simple, right? It's going to be find out what they want, clarify it if you don't know, and then write them an answer, right? If you're creating a song, it's going to be, well, write the lyrics, then write the music, then make sure the two align, right? If it's a report, then you're going to do the research, you're going to write the report, you're going to check your facts, right? You're going to write. So that flow ends up being something that is also almost in a very meta sense, part of what defines an agent, right? How is it going to, how is that agent going to ultimately perform in a sequence of steps to get the job done? And it is part of that tools and context that make up what an agent is.
What are some of the more compelling agents you guys have actually seen in the wild? Because this is sort of still new, and people are just getting started on this stuff.
Yeah, some of the consumer-facing ones are they have that that magical sense to them, right? So as two examples, Lovable's agent to vibe code, right? That's an agent.
Right. That's a good point.
Suno is another one. It's fascinating to see Suno do its work. Clearly another
For
case of
folks
an
who
agent,
don't,
right?
if listeners don't know, Suno is music, right?
Is music generation, yeah, absolutely. And what's fascinating there is, you don't get the sense that you're working with GPT, like, like if you think of the Chat GPT and maybe Midjourney, those are the quintessential write a prompt and get a thing, right? You get some text back, you get a picture back, and all minds were blown. Well, now, now with Sora, you're having your mind blown by a thing that generates videos, and with Suno, you're having your mind blown by a thing that generates, music. And the notebook platform that makes amazing podcasts, right? These are all agents. These are all agents
videos,
that are doing
right,
and videos as well,
which is crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think you might have just stole your thunder, Stu, but
Yeah, but I mean, to me, the agent, the two most interesting agents in the wild, and there's a bunch of examples of each that are all good, are software development and deep research, right? So, and so when you look at just the ability to say, like, deep research is a great example of saying, like, here's here's what I want you to go do. I want you to put together a 30-page report in this format with this goal, and go use a bunch of tools potentially, right? Whatever, and different deep research tools have, can give you access to more things, maybe more than just web search, and go make a plan, do a bunch of research, iterate a little, and come back with the structured narrative. That's a great example of an agent, and I think there's been a lot of movement in that space over the last year, and I think a lot of other tests will generalize to a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like deep research, if people haven't used it, you need to get a subscription that allows you to use deep research. It is massively useful if you're getting ready to go to a meeting with a client, or just trying to learn a new industry or something like that. And then taking that, Stu, and putting it into you sort of, we're sharing everybody with everybody Notebook LM, and then getting a podcast on the topic while you're driving to work. And so, I mean, it's just a crazy, and enables just this crazy ability to learn things, I think, really, really quickly. Deep research is awesome. One of the ones, what do you guys think, this one's probably out on the edge, where do you think these computer use models will go? I'm personally, I think they're sort of amazing, and to do things like, I don't know, I want to go on LinkedIn and find people that I'm connected to in a certain industry, and have it go off for, it might take longer than it would take me, but I don't have to spend the time, right? It'll go off for an hour and go work on things. But it feels really, I don't know, I always feel a little bit uneasy, correct? Because I have to put in my credentials for my LinkedIn on this computer that's somewhere in God knows where. And, but man, it just feels like there's some really interesting, like the new RPA sort of applications there.
Yeah. Look, there's a almost like an information theoretical level answer to that, which is that layering systems is always going to be the fastest way to a new working thing. So, if you look at like the air traffic control system that's out there, wrapping something around the old one is the fastest way to make a new one, and then you can slowly digest parts of the old one until it's gone, right? But wrapping around the old one is the fastest way to do it at first, and the same with enterprise microservice architectures, and the same with all kinds of different systems, right? So I think self-driving cars have to drive on the roads we have first, and then eventually maybe they'll they'll be able to go cross country over, right? So that's sort of a theme. So from an information theoretical perspective, there's a lot of support for saying, the best way is to let these new thinking machines use the tools that the thinking humans used to use, right?
Yeah.
But it'll always be better eventually to automate that away. But I think it's sort of undeniable, and the certainly the tools can learn from the complexity of the UI that we experience, and you combine these two things, something that knows how to use a browser and something that knows how to code, and all of a sudden you could see it using the browser to figure out how to write the code to not need the browser anymore, right? That I think is a very real loop that would automate the process of creating enterprise level microservices, right? To say, yep, everything this website does, any atomic capabilities, reverse engineer those, build tools around it, test it, and let me know in the morning if we're ready to go.
Right.
Yeah,
Stu,
I've been using the Perplexity browser.
Yeah.
Perplexity has this browser called Comet, and it has this capability built into it. I'm using it right now, actually, and it's it's pretty great. I mean, you have to kind of learn where to use it and not use it, but I think it's one of the things I find that I think one of the things in general I find is that a lot of my workflow has moved to voice, and these type of tools help that, so like I can actually with Comet, I can just have the, either it has a voice mode and I can talk to it and then it'll do some stuff, and it'll go off and do it and do a few steps, and it might just save a few steps for me or whatever, but it's pretty interesting, I think, and definitely, as Mike said, I think it's a good, they're already evolving. The early versions of this were literally just in your browser and simulating the mouse and clicking.
Yeah, exactly.
And now, I think as these things get more sophisticated, they're only doing that when they don't have another way to get it done, but if they have another tool that lets them do the job, without having to do that, they'll take advantage of that first. So I think it's a good, I'm pretty bullish generally, but it's but they still have a long way to go to if you try to use them.
Yeah, I think if I were to repeat, I think what I hear you guys saying is, well, having to navigate a website that may no longer be the way that agents work, right? Because that's the way humans work. But having an interface and an API and so on to all these things may end up being much more where the road is headed, as opposed to continued advances around how do I use a browser more effectively, or how do I sort of teach a machine to click around.
Yeah, and that's kind of what MCPs are doing, right? MCPs basically expose a lot of the functionality. Websites are normally talking to APIs. These MCPs basically just give a structured way to talk to the APIs for LLMs versus the browser is a structured way to talk to APIs for humans. So I think that's why MCPs are so important.
That's right. And what we're seeing is really interesting. Those APIs were meant for conventional software to use, right? And so now what I'm seeing is a lot of people just wrap MCP servers around the old APIs, and they end up being really, really clunky and brittle APIs, right? Like Google offers, like even the Maps interface for Google has hundreds of APIs to it, right? An LLM just wants to know, give me a picture at this address, right? So because it's a lot more like a human than it is like that old software. So MCP is going to, so there will be a layer in between, and it may be coded automatically, but it's a layer in between that groups a lot of those old microservices into these atomic units, commit units, right? I'm going to make a payment, right? Well, what does a make a payment do? Well, it means making a note in the ledger that I made the payment, actually issuing the payment, probably making sure that I had the money before that, right? So doing all those things at once, where those might have been 5 different API calls that your old code did. The language model has to remember to do them all in a row and coordinate them just right, or there'll be a new tool that says, yeah, just do those 5 things. That's an atomic unit of work exposed as an MCP server.
And in the web world, the web was doing that, right? Like as a
Mm,
user, you would type in whatever you wanted or, make payment and it would go off and
right.
the web app was making those 5 API calls and doing all that work. So yeah, I think that's, done well versus just being a wrapper to an API. I think the MCP kind of becomes the analog for the browser for the LLM. You know what I mean? Like its
Mm,
way of kind of getting these tests
Yeah,
done.
that's exactly right. In fact, it's very, very much that the MCP discovery services are a browser, right? The
Yeah.
LLM can browse the available catalog of services and use them, right? So it's very much an
yeah.
analogy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah. Well, guys, I think we're about at time. We've lost poor Jim, but hopefully he'll be
It's a
able to
wrap.
join us, for the next time. Look, we covered, we started with this. I think this MIT study was just really interesting to see where companies are struggling, and I think what we would say is like, listen, there is a lot of work you need to do to understand what's the right way to apply the LLM, understanding the very nature of LLMs, how to apply it in various use cases. And I think Stu, you talked a lot about this too, around understanding that creating these agents and leveraging LLMs, you got to be, especially in these deeper use cases, they're not all the easy button. There is a lot of work around providing the right context and training and guardrails and so on, to really get value from that as we move really very quickly down this road. So guys, great to see you. See you next time.
Yeah. Yep.
Take
Have a great
care.
weekend.